No, I really didn't. I didn't remember when he left.
He was the man who walked away from the most popular television series in America at the height of its success, turned down what would have been millions more in earnings, and never once publicly claimed he regretted it. In a Western that the whole country watched every week, Pernell Roberts was the one actor on the Bonanza cast who refused to pretend the show was more than it was, and that honesty cost him nearly everything while somehow defining him more completely than any role ever could. Most actors in Hollywood spend their careers carefully protecting their image, shaking hands with people they privately despise, and burying real opinions beneath layers of polished professionalism. Roberts didn't operate that way. He said what he believed, marched where his conscience pointed, and walked away from everything when staying stopped making sense to him. That kind of unfiltered honesty is rare anywhere, but inside the television industry of the 1960s, it was practically career-ending behavior. What it earned him was enemies, fractured friendships, and a reputation as the difficult one. What it left behind was something far more durable than fame. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the feuds, the falling outs, and the deeply personal reasons behind his most strained relationships with the actors he simply couldn't respect. Some of what follows will reframe people you've admired for decades. Some of it will remind you that the most honest man on that Ponderosa set wasn't the one the cameras loved the most. It was the one who eventually chose to leave. Pernell Elvin Roberts, Jr. arrived in the world on May 18, 1928, in Wayne, Georgia, raised as an only child by a father who managed sales for Dr. Pepper and a mother named Minnie Myrtle Morgan Roberts. Growing up in the Deep South during the Great Depression didn't offer much in the way of luxury, but it gave Roberts something more durable, a restless inner life that found its outlet early through music and performance. School bands, church performances, the horn in his hands wherever he could put it, and behind all of it, a young man already searching for something that everyday life couldn't fully satisfy. Georgia Tech came first after high school, a brief attempt at engineering that confirmed what he probably already suspected, that his mind wasn't built for that. The United States Marine Corps followed in 1946, where he served 2 years and played the tuba and horn in the Marine Corps Band, keeping performance alive even within the structured discipline of military life. After his discharge, the University of Maryland offered him student theater, which turned out to be far more useful than any of his academic courses, and he left before finishing his degree, packed what he had, and moved to New York City in the early 1950s. New York is where the actor inside him finally had room to breathe. Studying at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts while working odd jobs to stay afloat, Roberts landed his first stage role in 1952 in The Man Who Came to Dinner, a modest beginning that quietly announced someone serious had arrived. Classical theater followed, productions of Macbeth, The Taming of the Shrew, and Romeo and Juliet, along with work with the Shakespeare Festival in New York that earned him genuine respect among people who could tell the difference between real craft and performance. That foundation is what he carried with him when Hollywood eventually came looking. Screen work began in 1958 with Desire Under the Elms, a film that placed him alongside Sophia Loren and Burl Ives, and he followed it with The Sheepman and guest appearances on shows like The Virginian and Gunsmoke. None of it prepared him for what came next. In 1959, NBC cast him as Adam Cartwright, the eldest son on Bonanza, and within months he was one of the most recognized faces on American television, earning close to $10,000 per episode on a show that became the defining Western drama of its era. None of it made him happy. The writing frustrated him. The refusal to engage with any kind of racial or social complexity infuriated him. He pushed for more diversity behind the camera, questioned why white actors kept being cast in Native American roles, and demanded more depth for his character. The producers heard him out and continued doing exactly what they'd always done. After 6 seasons, in 1965, Roberts left Bonanza while it was still the most watched show on television. What most people called career suicide, he called the only honest option available to him. That changed when he returned to theater, rebuilt through guest television roles, and eventually landed the lead in Trapper John M.D. in the late 1970s, earning critical recognition and a completely new audience who had no idea he'd once walked away from something much bigger. Between Bonanza and that later reinvention, 5 specific feuds left marks that never fully healed. Michael Landon came first. On screen, Little Joe Cartwright was the fan favorite, the youngest brother, the one audiences consistently adored, and Landon knew it. As his popularity climbed, so did his creative influence on the series, and that's when Roberts noticed something that bothered him more than any script problem ever had. Episodes were getting rewritten. Little Joe's role kept expanding. Adam Cartwright's kept shrinking. Roberts confronted Landon directly and told him plainly that he wasn't trying to improve the show. He was trying to make himself larger within it. From that point forward, the two men shared scenes because their contracts required it and exchanged almost nothing beyond that. When Roberts left Bonanza, Landon made no phone call, issued no public acknowledgement, offered nothing that resembled basic professional courtesy. Years later, when Little House on the Prairie turned Landon into a television icon all over again, Roberts watched and noted it was more of the same. Still the cowboy, still the saint, just different scenery surrounding him. Dan Blocker hurt differently, because the distance between them started from something that had genuinely been a friendship. Both classically trained, both capable of far more than Bonanza was asking of them, Roberts and Blocker connected early over a shared seriousness about the craft, and that's what made the eventual split so hard to absorb. As Roberts's battles with the studio grew louder and more frequent, Blocker pulled back and chose the role of peacemaker, the man who kept everyone calm without holding anyone accountable. Roberts felt that as a betrayal. When he walked off set mid-scene over a script he found degrading to a Native American character, Blocker finished the scene without hesitation, and that image stayed with Roberts for years. He later described Blocker as a man who had the heart but not the spine, someone who chose comfort over conscience every single time the choice was actually forced on him. Their friendship dissolved without confrontation, which in some ways made it worse, leaving Roberts carrying the quiet grief of watching someone he'd considered a brother simply choose the easier road. Chuck Connors arrived from outside Bonanza entirely, and the feud between them ignited fast and burned clean. Best known as the star of The Rifleman, Connors was a towering presence at a charity event honoring Western television legends, beloved by fans and fully aware of it. Backstage, Roberts watched him publicly humiliate a young production assistant over something completely minor, the kind of casual cruelty that powerful people sometimes permit themselves when they believe no one worth impressing is watching. Roberts was watching. He waited until they were alone, then confronted Connors directly, and the exchange escalated quickly, Connors calling Roberts a bitter quitter who couldn't handle success, Roberts calling him a fraud. They never occupied the same room again after that night. Connors was all hat and no soul, Roberts told people afterward, a man who had built his entire career on the image of honor while showing none of it to the people who deserved it most. The tension with Lorne Greene ran beneath every day Roberts spent on the Bonanza set, quiet and persistent. Greene played Ben Cartwright, the patriarch the whole series revolved around, and the problem wasn't his talent. The problem was everything Greene was willing to accept in exchange for staying at the center of it. While Roberts pushed for moral complexity and genuine social relevance inside the scripts, Greene kept the machine running smoothly for the network, never challenging anything that might create discomfort for the studio, never questioning the conservative values baked into every episode. Roberts didn't read that as professionalism. He read it as a deliberate choice to place personal safety above artistic truth, and he despised it. The way other cast members deferred to Greene added another layer of resentment, and by the time Roberts walked in 1965 and was asked to explain why, his answer was direct. he hadn't wanted to spend the rest of his life pulling his hat off and saying, "Yes, sir." America knew Lorne Greene as its favorite television father. Roberts knew him as the clearest symbol of everything Hollywood worked hardest to protect. James Drury rounded out the list, and this particular feud had less to do with personal behavior and more to do with belief, which can sometimes make things harder to resolve rather than easier. Drury, the stoic star of the Virginian, held firm conservative values and believed strongly that entertainment and political activism should occupy entirely separate spaces. Roberts had physically marched alongside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Selma, Alabama, spoken out publicly against the Vietnam War, and spent years pressing against Hollywood's systematic exclusion of people of color both in front of and behind the camera. Those two worldviews were never going to coexist peacefully. At a 1970s panel on the future of television, Roberts criticized networks for using the Western genre to reinforce outdated values while avoiding anything resembling genuine social engagement, and that's when Drury fired back that audiences wanted escape, not lectures. The exchange grew heated enough that when it ended, they refused to shake hands. Roberts told a close friend afterward that Drury had never simply been an actor. He had been a mouthpiece for the status quo, and for a man who believed that silence on civil rights wasn't neutral but complicit, that was something he couldn't overlook or forgive. These feuds weren't about ego or petty professional rivalry. They were the natural friction produced by a man who operated according to a code most of his peers had quietly decided was impractical. Roberts believed that a public platform carried real obligation, that stories shaped how people understood the world, and that the people telling them owed their audience something genuinely honest. That belief made him difficult to work beside. It also made him impossible to simply dismiss. His personal life carried weight that the public rarely saw. 4 marriages marked his adult years, the first to Vera, a professor and theater expert, in 1951, which produced his only son, Jonathan Christopher Roberts. That marriage ended in divorce in 1959, and while Roberts loved his son deeply, the distance between them never fully closed. 2 more marriages followed, and both ended in divorce, and people who knew him well described a man who required personal freedom in a way that made sustained closeness genuinely difficult, who kept walls around himself even with the people most committed to getting past them. None of that pain compared to what arrived in 1989, when Jonathan died in a motorcycle accident at 38 years old. Friends said Roberts was never the same man afterward. He carried that loss the way he carried most of his deepest grief, entirely privately, without the world being invited in. His 4th marriage to Eleanor Criswell in 1997 brought him something closer to peace, and they remained together until he was gone. The later years pulled him away from public life without ceremony. Trapper John, M.D., had carried him through the 1980s with critical recognition and a genuine second act, but eventually he let the spotlight go without looking back. No fan conventions, no nostalgic interview circuits, no attempts to trade on past visibility. Music, social justice work, and a quieter life filled the space instead. Behind the scenes, pancreatic cancer had found him, and he fought it the way he had always fought everything, privately and entirely on his own terms. On January 24, 2010, Roberts passed away at his home in Malibu, California, at 81 years old, the last surviving member of the original Bonanza cast. His estate sat at an estimated $10 million at the time of his death, a figure built largely from a career he'd spent half of actively fighting against. His legacy was never going to live inside the roles he played, and he probably understood that. It lives in the moments when he set the script down and said plainly what everyone else had decided wasn't worth the trouble of saying out loud. That kind of choice doesn't make a person universally loved. What it does is make them genuinely unforgettable, and Pernell Roberts, measured against everything Hollywood asked him to be and chose not to, was exactly that.